June 1917. Atlantic Ocean, 350 miles west of Cork. Captain Thomas Wells of the transport ship Ohio Pride presses binoculars to his eyes. His vessel sails as part of Convoy HX-42. 23 loaded transports stretched across the gray ocean. Last night there were 26. 3 ships vanished in the past 12 hours. Torpedoes came without warning. White trails in the water, explosion, then only bubbles and debris. U-boats hunt in packs now. 70,000 tons of American cargo sink to the bottom every week. America loses more tonnage than it delivers to Europe. The mathematics favor the Kaiser. Newspapers in New York write about crisis. If the Germans continue sinking ships at this rate, the Atlantic floor will become a graveyard. Congressmen demand the cessation of convoy operations. But Captain Wells did not yet know that at this very moment, engineers at Philadelphia and New York shipyards were implementing revolutionary welding technology. Construction time for a transport drops from 8 months to 6 weeks. 50 slipways operate around the clock. America prepares to unleash upon Germany a steel flood that no torpedo can stop. The war transforms from a battle of submariners into a race of production. And in this race, victory belongs to whoever has more factories. In January 1917, Admiral Henning von Holtzendorff presented Kaiser Wilhelm II with what appeared to be irrefutable mathematics. His memorandum outlined a strategy of unrestricted submarine warfare that would force Britain to capitulate within 6 months, before American intervention could become meaningful. The calculation was precise and seemingly scientific. If German U-boats could sink 600,000 tons of Allied shipping monthly, Britain would exhaust its food reserves by August 1917. Holtzendorff's staff had meticulously analyzed British import requirements, calculated shipping losses against replacement capacity, and determined the exact tonnage necessary to starve the island nation into submission. Germany's submarine fleet numbered approximately 140 operational U-boats in early 1917, with another 100 under construction or in trials. Each vessel could sink an average of 15,000 to 20,000 tons per patrol. The mathematics suggested that Germany possessed not just sufficient naval power to execute the strategy successfully, but an overwhelming advantage that would force Britain to negotiate before summer's end. The German naval staff war-gamed multiple scenarios. Every calculation pointed to the same conclusion. Britain's dependence on seaborne imports created a fatal vulnerability. The island nation imported 60% of its food and virtually all petroleum and raw materials necessary for war industry. Sever these maritime lifelines, and Britain would collapse regardless of battlefield outcomes in France. Holtzendorff acknowledged that unrestricted warfare, attacking all vessels, including neutrals, without warning, would likely bring America into the conflict, but his analysis dismissed this concern with fatal confidence. The United States possessed approximately 2.5 million tons of suitable merchant shipping in January 1917. Even if America mobilized its entire merchant fleet for war supply, German U-boats would sink vessels faster than convoys could transport troops and material across 3,000 miles of hostile ocean. The calculation contained a deeper assumption, that America's merchant fleet represented a fixed resource, subject to depletion through attrition. German planners calculated shipping losses against existing American tonnage, never seriously considering that the United States might fundamentally alter the equation by building new vessels at unprecedented rates. This was not mere oversight, but reflected fundamental assumptions about industrial capacity. German shipyards, among the world's most advanced in 1914, required 8 to 12 months to construct a cargo vessel using traditional riveted assembly methods. Holtzendorff's staff assumed American yards operated under similar constraints. They believed shipbuilding timelines were governed by immutable technical requirements that no amount of resources could substantially accelerate. The German naval staff made one catastrophic miscalculation. They assumed America would fight World War I using World War I technology. They never anticipated that America would revolutionize shipbuilding itself. For the first months of unrestricted submarine warfare, German confidence appeared entirely justified. February 1917 saw 540,000 tons of Allied shipping destroyed. March exceeded 600,000 tons. Then came April, the blackest month of the entire naval war. German U-boats sank 881,027 tons of Allied shipping in April 1917, the highest monthly total recorded during World War I. 1 in every 4 merchant vessels departing British ports never returned. Norwegian, Danish, Dutch, and Swedish neutral shipping, previously immune from attack under international law, now fled the Atlantic trade routes entirely after multiple neutral vessels were torpedoed without warning. British coal reserves dropped to 6 weeks' supply. Food rationing intensified across the United Kingdom as grain shipments from North America plummeted. British Admiral John Jellicoe, first Sea Lord, privately informed the War Cabinet that if losses continued at April's rate, Britain would be forced to negotiate by November 1917. The Royal Navy, master of the seas for 2 centuries and the world's most powerful naval force, appeared helpless against the invisible threat stalking beneath the waves. Individual losses illustrated the catastrophe's scale. The SS Aztec, an American merchant ship, was torpedoed on April 1, 1917, with the loss of 28 crew members, among the first American casualties after the declaration of war. The British steamer Torrington sank with 10,000 tons of food supplies. The French ship Sidi Bel Abs went down with 8,500 tons of coal desperately needed for British power generation. In Washington, the recently declared war against Germany suddenly appeared catastrophically premature. President Wilson had committed the United States to defeat Imperial Germany, but the strategic situation suggested America might lack the means to make that commitment meaningful. The United States possessed the manpower and industrial capacity to field a massive army, but no apparent means to transport that army across an ocean controlled by German submarines. Military planners calculated grim statistics. At April 1917, loss rates, perhaps 1 in 3 troop ships would reach France. If the American Expeditionary Force embarked for Europe in summer 1917 as planned, tens of thousands of American soldiers might drown in the Atlantic before firing a shot in Europe. The political consequences of such losses were unthinkable. The strategic consequences would be devastating. American military intervention might prove entirely ineffective, and Germany could concentrate all forces on the Western Front without concern for a significant American presence. The U.S. Shipping Board had been established in September 1916, months before America entered the war. Its original mandate was to expand American merchant marine capacity through federal coordination and financing, a peacetime effort to support American overseas trade. When war was declared in April 1917, this modest bureaucratic agency transformed overnight into the Emergency Fleet Corporation, the largest shipbuilding organization in human history. The Emergency Fleet Corporation's mission was brutally simple: build ships faster than Germany could sink them. Chairman Edward Hurley, a Chicago industrialist with no shipbuilding experience, understood that this required completely reimagining shipbuilding methodology. Traditional construction techniques, refined over centuries, could not meet the strategic challenge. If America was to win the tonnage war, the shipbuilding industry needed to industrialize itself. to transform from a craft-based industry producing custom vessels to a mass-production industry manufacturing standardized products. The corporation's strategy rested on three revolutionary concepts that would transform not just shipbuilding, but American industrial practice. Standardization, prefabrication, and mass production applied to structures weighing thousands of tons. Standardization meant designing a limited number of vessel types with interchangeable components. Rather than custom designing each ship for specific trade routes or cargo types, the Emergency Fleet Corporation would build thousands of identical vessels. Every ship would use the same engines, the same propellers, the same hull plates, the same electrical systems. This standardization enabled economies of scale in component manufacturing and simplified construction processes. Prefabrication meant manufacturing ship components in dedicated fabrication facilities, rather than assembling everything on the shipway. Bow sections, stern assemblies, engine mounts, entire deck houses, all would be built as complete modules, then transported to assembly yards for final installation. This approach paralleled automotive manufacturing, where components were produced in specialized facilities and then assembled into complete vehicles on production lines. Mass production meant treating shipbuilding as an industrial process rather than skilled craft work. Semi-skilled workers, trained in specific tasks, would replace master shipwrights. Specialized machinery would replace hand tools. Welding would replace riveting. Speed would replace craftsmanship. Federal investment flowed at unprecedented scale. The Emergency Fleet Corporation allocated $3 billion for shipyard construction and vessel orders, equivalent to approximately $60 billion in 2024 currency. To put this in context, total federal spending in 1916 had been $734 million. The Emergency Fleet Corporation's budget exceeded 4 times the entire previous year's federal expenditure. Existing private shipyards expanded capacity with federal financing. Entirely new facilities arose on sites that had been marshland or farmland 6 months earlier. The scale of construction was staggering. Between April 1917 and November 1918, the United States built or substantially expanded over 200 shipyard facilities, creating industrial infrastructure that would persist for decades. On January 12, 1917, 3 months before America entered the war, American Shipbuilding Company surveyed 846 acres of mudflat and marshland on the Delaware River near Philadelphia. The site was unremarkable. Tidal flats occasionally flooded by the river, populated by wild hogs that gave the location its name, with no infrastructure or development. By March 1917, 30,000 construction workers were transforming this marshland into Hog Island Shipyard, the largest, most advanced shipbuilding facility ever constructed. The facility's scale defied comprehension even by American industrial standards. 50 slipways, each capable of simultaneously constructing a 7,500-ton cargo vessel. 14 massive fabrication shops where steel plates were cut, shaped, and welded into complete ship sections weighing dozens of tons. A dedicated power plant generating 60,000 horsepower to run the facility's machinery. Complete housing infrastructure for 35,000 workers, including dormitories, cafeterias, medical facilities, and recreational spaces. A transportation network including dedicated rail lines connecting to the Pennsylvania Railroad main line, internal shipyard railway exceeding 95 miles of track, and a complete road system. The construction effort itself was remarkable. Engineers drove over 80,000 pilings into the soft river bottom to create stable foundations for slipways and fabrication shops. They excavated over 5 million cubic yards of earth, dredged the Delaware River to accommodate deep draft vessels, and constructed concrete foundations sufficient to support overhead cranes lifting 200-ton loads. The infrastructure investment before a single ship component was fabricated exceeded $60 million more than the total cost of constructing the Panama Canal's Gatun locks. Hog Island implemented prefabricated construction with ruthless efficiency that revolutionized shipbuilding practice. Traditional shipbuilding assembled vessels plate by plate directly on the slipway. A shipwright would position a steel plate against the vessel's growing skeleton, mark bolt holes, drill those holes, heat rivets to cherry-red temperatures, then hammer them into place through aligned holes in overlapping steel plates. A single riveted seam might contain thousands of individual rivets, each requiring a team of 4 workers, a heater, a catcher, a bucker, and a riveter, and considerable time to install properly. Hog Island's method fabricated entire multi-ton ship sections, bow assemblies, stern sections, mid-ship modules complete with internal framing and compartmentation, in enclosed fabrication shops where conditions could be controlled and workers could operate at optimal efficiency. These massive components were then transported to the slipways via overhead cranes capable of lifting 200 tons and specialized rail systems designed to move assemblies weighing as much as a locomotive. The key innovation enabling this approach was electric arc welding. Traditional riveted construction was labor-intensive and slow. A skilled riveting team might install 300 to 400 rivets during a 10-hour shift. A cargo vessel required approximately 2 million rivets, meaning riveting alone consumed months of construction time. Electric arc welding replaced this labor-intensive process with a continuous bead of molten metal fusing plates together. A welder using electric arc equipment could lay down 20 feet of weld bead per hour. Work that would require hundreds of rivets and multiple workers using traditional methods. Welded construction was faster, required less skilled labor, produced lighter structures, eliminating thousands of heavy rivets, reduced vessel weight, and created stronger seams less prone to failure under stress. The efficiency gains were staggering and challenged every assumption about shipbuilding timelines. Traditional construction required 8 to 12 months to complete a cargo vessel from keel laying to launch. Hog Island's initial target was 45 days, a 10-fold increase in construction speed, representing the difference between craft manufacturing and industrial mass production. By mid-1918, the production race reached its decisive phase where mathematical realities became inescapable even to German naval command. German U-boats, at peak effectiveness during the second half of 1917, sank approximately 300,000 tons of Allied shipping monthly. This remained devastating. Every sunken vessel represented cargo lost, sailors drowned, and resources wasted. But these losses, catastrophic by any previous standard, were no longer sufficient to achieve strategic objectives. American shipyards were launching new vessels at a rate exceeding 250,000 tons monthly by late 1918. When combined with British shipbuilding producing approximately 150,000 tons monthly and smaller Canadian contributions, Allied shipbuilding not only replaced losses, but exceeded them by substantial margins. The tonnage war had reversed completely. The Allied merchant fleet was growing despite continued U-boat attacks. The strategic implications were profound and fundamentally altered the naval war's trajectory. Germany's unrestricted submarine warfare strategy rested entirely on the assumption that U-boats could sink ships faster than the Allies could replace them. This assumption held true for exactly 6 months, February through July 1917, when monthly sinkings exceeded 500,000 tons, while Allied replacement construction totaled only 300,000 tons. By August 1917, Allied production began closing the gap as new American facilities came online. By spring 1918, production exceeded losses for the first time since unrestricted warfare began. By summer 1918, The Allied merchant fleet was actually expanding, adding net tonnage to its inventory despite continued U-boat successes. A U-boat might sink 3 or 4 merchant vessels during a successful patrol, perhaps 30,000 tons total destroyed. But during that same 2-month patrol period, American shipyards launched 8 to 10 new vessels, totaling 7,000 tons. The submarine was a sophisticated weapon requiring specialized construction facilities, trained crews, and months of building time that Germany's strained economy could barely support. A merchant ship, by contrast, could be mass-produced using standardized components, assembled by semi-skilled labor trained in weeks, and launched in barely more time than required to train a U-boat crew. Germany constructed approximately 390 U-boats during the entire war, at enormous cost in steel, skilled labor, and industrial capacity. The Hog Island facility alone was designed to produce 180 merchant vessels annually, nearly half Germany's total submarine production, but in cargo vessels, each carrying 10 times more tonnage than a submarine could sink in its entire operational life. American industrial output didn't merely match German submarine warfare. It overwhelmed it through sheer volume that no amount of tactical excellence could overcome. This was the industrial equivalent of attempting to empty the ocean with a bucket while someone else refilled it with a fire hose. The first Hog Island keel was laid on February 9, 1918, marking the beginning of what would become the largest single shipbuilding program in history. The vessel, christened Quist Conch after a Native American chief, launched on August 5, 1918, 177 days after construction began. This was substantially slower than the 45-day target, reflecting the facility's learning curve, the need to train thousands of workers in unfamiliar welding techniques, and inevitable complications from implementing entirely new construction methods at unprecedented scale. But even 177 days represented revolutionary speed compared to traditional shipbuilding. A vessel that would have required 10 to 12 months using conventional methods was completed in less than 6 months. And this was merely the beginning, the first awkward steps of a facility learning to operate at full capacity. By autumn 1918, Hog Island reached peak efficiency that vindicated every optimistic projection. Vessels launched every 3 to 4 days. Multiple ships at different construction stages occupied the 50 slipways simultaneously. The facility operated 3 shifts, 24 hours daily, 7 days weekly, without pause. Welding arcs lit the Philadelphia night sky like a steel foundry, visible for miles. The sound of pneumatic hammers, massive overhead cranes moving ship sections, and industrial-scale steel plate cutting created a continuous industrial symphony audible across the Delaware River. The workforce reached 35,000, more people than lived in most American cities. Workers came from across the nation, drawn by relatively high wages and patriotic appeals to support the war effort. Many had never seen a ship before arriving at Hog Island. Within weeks, they were welding ship hulls, installing engines, or operating overhead cranes moving assemblies weighing more than 50 automobiles. Hog Island alone planned to deliver 180 cargo vessels by 1920. More tonnage than the entire German merchant marine possessed in 1914. Each vessel could carry 7,500 deadweight tons of cargo, enough capacity to transport 500,000 artillery shells or provisions for 10,000 soldiers for 3 months. The strategic implications of this production capacity were staggering. And Hog Island was merely the largest and most visible of dozens of Emergency Fleet Corporation facilities transforming American coastlines into shipbuilding centers. Newark Bay Shipbuilding in New Jersey implemented similar prefabrication methods. Submarine Boat Corporation in Groton, Connecticut, adapted welding techniques for specialized vessel construction. On the West Coast, facilities in Seattle, San Francisco, Oakland, Los Angeles, and San Diego all implemented mass production approaches. The scope of American shipbuilding mobilization becomes clear in the statistics, which tell a story of industrial transformation unmatched in history. In 1916, American shipyards delivered 235,000 tons of new merchant shipping, respectable output for peacetime, but entirely inadequate for war. In 1917, with emergency programs beginning to take effect, production increased to 1,100,000 tons, nearly 5 times 1916 levels. In 1918, American yards launched 30,000 tons, nearly 13 times the 1916 output and more tonnage than Germany's entire merchant fleet. In 1919, even as war production wound down after the November 1918 armistice, American shipyards still delivered 100,000 tons of new vessels. American shipbuilding synchronized with British naval innovation to create an insurmountable defense that combined quantity with tactical effectiveness. In May 1917, after intense internal debate that nearly fractured the Royal Navy's command structure, First Sea Lord Admiral John Jellicoe reluctantly authorized systematic convoy implementation, abandoning the Navy's traditional strategy of dispersed anti-submarine patrols that had proven utterly ineffective against U-boat attacks. The convoy system's effectiveness rested on mathematical principles that submarines could not overcome. A submarine patrolling a given ocean zone measuring perhaps 50,000 square miles might encounter an independently sailing merchant ship every few days, given the density of Atlantic shipping in 1917. But convoys concentrated 50 or 60 vessels into a single formation, measuring perhaps 5 square miles, defended by 6 to 8 destroyer escorts equipped with depth charges and hydrophones. This reduced encounter opportunities dramatically. A submarine might patrol for weeks without encountering any targets in vast empty ocean, while simultaneously increasing risk to attacking submarines that faced immediate counterattack from escort vessels. For U-boats, convoys transformed target-rich hunting grounds into empty oceans, punctuated occasionally by heavily defended formations that could destroy a submarine before it escaped after attacking. A submarine might patrol for 2 weeks, covering thousands of miles, consuming limited fuel and provisions, straining crew endurance, and encounter nothing. Then it might locate a convoy, but face 6 destroyers that would hunt it relentlessly for hours after any attack, forcing deep submersion that consumed battery power and exhausted crews. Convoy effectiveness is clearly visible in the statistics that German naval command studied with increasing desperation. In April 1917, before convoy implementation, U-boats sank 881,000 tons of Allied shipping at a loss rate of approximately 1 U-boat per 4 submarine patrols, an acceptable exchange ratio from Germany's perspective. By October 1917, with the convoy system fully operational across Atlantic routes, monthly sinkings dropped to 458,000 tons despite more U-boats being operational than in April. By April 1918, monthly losses fell to 300,000 tons, while U-boat losses increased to 1 submarine per 2 patrols. Most significantly, U-boats sank less than 1% of vessels sailing in properly organized, protected convoys. The vast majority of continued losses were independently sailing ships predating convoy system implementation, vessels traveling alone for various operational reasons, or stragglers that fell behind convoy formations and became isolated targets. When convoy protection combined with accelerating American shipbuilding, the strategic situation became mathematically impossible for Germany to win. Fewer ships were being sunk even as more U-boats went on patrol, and those reduced losses were being replaced at 3 times the destruction rate. The tonnage war had become unwinnable. German Naval Command recognized this by mid-1918 but had no alternative strategy to propose. The fundamental strategic reality underlying the tonnage war was industrial capacity asymmetry that rendered German strategy futile regardless of tactical execution. Germany was fighting a war of attrition against an opponent with functionally unlimited resources relative to the conflict's scale, a hopeless strategic position that became more apparent with each passing month. American steel production in 1917 exceeded 45 million tons annually, more than Germany, Britain, and France combined produced. American petroleum production dominated global supply, producing over 60% of world output. American agriculture fed not only its domestic population, but provided substantial food exports to allied nations, even while supporting military operations. American industrial capacity could simultaneously support merchant shipbuilding, naval construction, munitions production, aircraft manufacturing, and domestic consumption without significant civilian sacrifice or resource competition between programs. Germany faced entirely different and increasingly desperate constraints. British naval blockades strangled German access to overseas resources that modern industrial warfare demanded. German steel production, dependent on Swedish iron ore imports via vulnerable Baltic shipping routes that Royal Navy submarines increasingly interdicted, could not expand to meet war demands. German agriculture, stripped of manpower conscripted for military service and deprived of chemical fertilizers diverted to explosives production, struggled to feed the civilian population. By 1918, German civilians were starving. The turnip winter of 1917 to 1918 saw widespread malnutrition and disease. Every German U-boat represented steel, skilled labor, and industrial capacity unavailable for other critical purposes. Germany could not simultaneously maximize submarine production, maintain surface fleet readiness, supply armies fighting on eastern and western fronts, produce sufficient artillery and ammunition, and sustain civilian economy at subsistence levels. Choices were necessary, and every choice meant fatal weakness elsewhere in Germany's war effort. America faced no such constraints or difficult choices. The Emergency Fleet Corporation could expand production without cannibalizing other military programs. Steel allocated to merchant shipbuilding did not reduce artillery shell production. There was sufficient steel for both, and for railroad construction and for domestic construction, and still excess capacity remained. Shipyard workers did not compete with munitions factories for labor. America's industrial workforce expanded to meet all demands simultaneously through previously underutilized labor pools, including women, rural workers, and immigrants. This asymmetry meant that Germany's strategic position deteriorated inexorably with every month of continued conflict. Each U-boat sunk, and by 1918, Germany was losing submarines faster than replacements could be constructed, was increasingly difficult to replace, given steel shortages and competition for specialized submarine construction facilities. Each merchant ship torpedoed was replaced by 3 more within months from American shipyards that operated without resource constraints. The longer the war continued, the more decisively America's industrial advantage manifested in every theater, but particularly in the tonnage war, where production capacity directly determined outcomes. When armistice was signed on November 11, 1918, the production war's outcome was unambiguous and demonstrated the futility of Germany's submarine strategy. American shipyards delivered over 2,300 vessels, totaling approximately 12 million deadweight tons between April 1917 and December 1919. German U-boats sank approximately 5,000 Allied merchant ships during the entire war, devastating losses representing roughly 11 million tons and countless lives. But insufficient against the scale of Allied replacement construction that exceeded losses by substantial margins. The American Expeditionary Force successfully transported over 2 million soldiers to France between April 1917 and November 1918, with remarkably few losses. German U-boats sank exactly 3 American troop ships during this period. The Tuscania in February 1918 with 230 casualties, the Moldavia in May 1918 with 56 casualties, and the Otranto in October 1918 with 431 casualties from collision during submarine attack. Total American casualties from U-boat attacks during troop transport operations were approximately 700 soldiers from over 2 million transported, a loss rate below 0.035%. The unrestricted submarine warfare strategy, designed specifically to prevent American troop deployment to Europe, failed completely and catastrophically. Not only did the strategy fail to prevent American intervention, but it brought America into the war while failing to achieve any of its strategic objectives. Admiral Holtzendorff's January 1917 calculations proved catastrophically flawed at every level of analysis. He correctly predicted unrestricted warfare would bring America into the conflict. This was the one accurate element of his analysis. He accurately estimated initial U-boat sinking capacity based on existing submarine forces. His fatal error, the miscalculation that invalidated the entire strategic concept, was assuming that American shipping capacity was fixed, that the 2.5 million tons of merchant vessels existing in January 1917 represented a static, depletable resource that could be destroyed through attrition faster than replacement. He never seriously considered that America might simply build more ships faster than Germany could sink them, revolutionizing shipbuilding methodology in the process. This single miscalculation invalidated the entire strategic concept. By the time German Naval Command recognized their fundamental error, probably by mid-1918, when statistical analysis made the mathematical impossibility undeniable, correction was impossible. Germany lacked the industrial capacity, resources, and time to compete in a production race against American manufacturing operating without constraints. The Atlantic Tonnage War of 1917 to 1918 established a principle that would dominate military strategic thinking for the remainder of the 20th century and beyond. In protracted industrial conflicts between modern nations, production capacity determines outcomes more decisively than tactical excellence, technological superiority, operational skill, or battlefield heroism. Germany fielded arguably the world's most effective submarine force in World War I. German U-boat crews demonstrated exceptional courage, endurance, and skill operating in one of warfare's most dangerous environments. German naval engineering was superb. U-boats were technologically sophisticated, reliable vessels that performed remarkably well under extreme conditions. German tactical doctrine was innovative and effective, particularly wolf-pack tactics that would be refined and employed even more effectively in World War II. None of these advantages mattered when confronted with an opponent capable of building ships 10 times faster than they could be destroyed. The lesson was absorbed by military establishments worldwide and influenced strategic planning for generations. 2 decades later, during World War II, American shipbuilding mobilization would dwarf even the Emergency Fleet Corporation's remarkable achievements. Liberty ships, the direct descendants of Hog Island's standardized cargo vessels, would be mass-produced at a rate of 3 per day at peak production, with some vessels completed in as little as 4 days from keel laying to launch. American naval construction would simultaneously deliver over 100 aircraft carriers of various types, while German and Japanese naval construction struggled desperately to replace battle losses. The Hog Island Shipyard, which ironically never completed a vessel that saw combat before the November 1918 armistice, nonetheless represented Germany's most decisive naval defeat of the war. Those 50 slipways and 14 fabrication shops, capable of producing multiple 7,500-ton vessels weekly, constituted a more powerful strategic weapon than any battleship or submarine ever constructed. The facility's mere existence, and the dozens of similar facilities across American coastlines, rendered German naval strategy futile regardless of tactical execution. Captain Wells, successfully guiding his battered convoy into Liverpool Harbor in June 1917 after losing 3 vessels to U-boat attacks, could not have known that within 18 months German Naval Command would privately acknowledge to the Kaiser the mathematical impossibility of their strategic situation. The U-boats continued fighting until armistice with typical German determination and skill, achieving tactical successes and sinking vessels until the war's final days. But the outcome had been determined, not in Atlantic battles between submarines and convoy escorts, but in Philadelphia fabrication shops, where electric arc welders wrote Germany's naval epitaph in rivers of molten steel joining standardized hull plates into mass-produced cargo vessels. The steel did not flow from American foundries into the Atlantic because German submarines were defeated at sea through superior tactics or technology. The submarines were defeated because American steel flowed faster than German torpedoes could destroy it. In total war between industrial nations, the factory proved mightier than the torpedo. A lesson that would shape strategic thinking for the remainder of the century and fundamentally altered how nations prepared for and conducted modern warfare.